I have cut out my sleeve with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and a 1 inch hem, marked my darts, my grain line, my elbow line, and most importantly, my notches. I have 1 notch on the front of my sleeve and 2 notches on the back of my sleeve. To start, we are going to run 2 rows of basting stitches within a 1/2 inch seam allowance between these 2 notches.
You can also do this step after constructing your sleeve, but it's easier if the sleeve is lying flat.
A basting stitch is sewn at the loosest stitch length on your machine. So on this machine, I'm going to turn my stitch all the way up to 5. A basting stitch is used for creating gathers and sewing things temporarily into place.
First, we need to locate our 1/2 inch guideline on our machine. If you do not have one or are unsure which line is the 1/2 inch, take a tape measure and line up an inch mark with your needle. Make sure your needle is centered. Then measure out 1/2 inch, C minus directly hitting the 1/2 inch line, and you can put a piece of tape along that line and mark it. You will also want to note where your 1/4 inch guideline is and how far away from the needle the outside edge of your presser foot is. Line up the edge of your fabric with the 1/4 inch guideline or the outside right edge of your presser foot. Start your basting stitch just above the notch. Do not backstitch your basting thread and make sure to leave a long tail at the beginning. Turn the fabric slightly with each stitch. Use your hand wheel and turn the fabric slowly as you stitch to get around the tight curves, keeping your stitch right against the edge. You can lift the presser foot while the needle is in the fabric to turn more easily, although be careful not to create sharp turns. Stop your basting stitch just above the opposite notch. Do not backstitch at the end of your stitch and pull it out, leaving a long tail. Once again, start your second row of basting stitches above your notch. Do not backstitch and leave a long tail. Line up the basting stitch you just sewed with the inside right edge of your presser foot or the edge of your fabric just past the 1/4 inch mark. Both these 2 rows of stitching should be within your 1/2 inch seam allowance so they don't show on the outside of the sleeve. Do not let the 2 stitch lines cross over each other or they will not gather properly. Once again, stop your stitch above your notches, don't backstitch, and pull it out, leaving a long tail. This is how your sleeve should look. Leave the threads hanging. Next, I'm going to sew my dart and iron it downward. Skip this step if your sleeve does not have a dart. Now it looks like this with the dart sewn, ironed downward, and the front is pressed flat. Now I can line up my underarm seam right sides together and sew along the whole length of the seam. Take a sleeve roll or an ironing substitute like a rolled towel and insert it into the sleeve from the armhole. You can purchase a sleeve roll at your local sewing store. Press open the underarm seam along the whole length and move the sleeve roll down as you go. You can also use a sleeve board to iron on. This one has a skinnier section on the top and a fatter section on the bottom. These are better for tighter sleeves. If you don't have one, I will often use a flat block of wood covered in muslin. Place the sleeve on the sleeve board or other ironing substitute and fold up the hem 1/2 inch. Starting at the seam, measure every section of the fold carefully and pin it in place before ironing. Make sure to put the plastic head of the pin away from where the iron will be. After ironing the first section, remove the pins and continue working around the whole sleeve. After working around the whole sleeve, fold up the hem another 1/2 inch and repeat the same steps. Continue with the rest of the hem. Turn your sleeve right side out and place it under the presser foot so that you're looking inside the hem. Line up the fold of the hem with the inside edge of your presser foot closest to your needle so that you're stitching just along the edge of the fold. Make sure that you are catching all layers of the folded hem. If you are having trouble, try lining up the outside left edge of your presser foot with the fold instead. Start your stitching at the seam in your sleeve, making sure to backstitch. I'm sewing from inside the sleeve so that I can make sure that none of the rest of the sleeve gets caught under the presser foot. Rotate the sleeve fabric towards you while sewing so that the next section to be stitched is always lying flat. As you get back to the beginning of the hem, make sure that your stitch lines match up and backstitch over your backstitching from before. After you trim your threads, your hem should look like this. No fold should be visible on the front, just the stitch line. And from the inside, your stitch line should fall just below the fold of your hem, and your seams should match up, and your stitch lines meet nicely together. Place the sleeve back on the sleeve board and press the hem from the front. To prepare to pin, match up your sleeve with the correct armhole. 2 notches goes on the back and 1 notch goes on the front. Flip your bodice inside out while leaving your sleeve right side out. You should now be looking down into your sleeve and at the wrong side of your bodice.
I'm going to start by pinning my underarm seams together. So I have where my front and back bodice meet and my underarm on my sleeve. Pin those together. I pin from the inside of the sleeve since I'll be sewing from the inside as I work my way around. Then you want to go up your sleeve and match up your notches. So here's my sleeve notch and my bodice notches. Pinning the rest of my sleeve so that it matches up. I'm going to go to the other side and match up my other notch. See how the underarm below the notches lines up nicely. There's no excess. Before I pin around the rest of my sleeve, I'm actually going to go up to the top and line up my new notch with my shoulder seam. If you don't know how your sleeve hangs yet, you can line up your grain line. And then you would check to make sure your sleeve hangs correctly afterward.